it's not enough to make a one-time decision. This is a lifelong project. And the most successful unions were those where they didn't try and hide caste, they didn't try and shut up about things, but they made that part and parcel of their day-to-day project. And so it is resistance, but it's resistance in a different register, a sort of day-to-day, everyday resistance.
Good evening to all. Welcome to this episode of Bookmarked at Gulplok. Today we are very fortunate to discuss a timely book, Caste in Everyday Life, Experience and Effect in the Indian Society, published in the year 2023. Before I go ahead and introduce our panelists for the day, let me give an overview of the book. The book has been edited by Hugo Gorringe and Dhaneswar Bhoi and has been published by Palgrave Macmillan in the year 2023. The book presents to us a lucid, extremely relatable narrative of caste and its forms of manifestation in our everyday lives through daily experiences, which have its manifold effect in the micro as well as the macro underpinnings of everything related to caste and its understanding as an experience. The book is divided across 13 chapters, touching upon pertinent themes such as caste and psychosocial violence, exclusion and its forms in education, caste, stigma and subject formation, banal casteism, everyday assertions of superiority, as well as economies of caste in employment and environment. With that, let me introduce you all to our panelists. We are very fortunate to have both the editors of the books with us today, as well as Aritra Mukherjee as panelists. Our first panelist, Dr. Hugo, is a senior lecturer in sociology and former co-director of the Center for South Asian Studies at the University of Edinburgh. His research interests focused on Dalit movements and politics in South Indian state of Tamil Nadu. He is the author of Untouchable Citizens and Panthers in Parliament. He has co-edited a number of volumes including From the Margins to the Mainstream, Civility in Crisis, and Caste in Everyday Life. He has also written numerous articles on caste, violence, and politics. Our second panelist, Dr. Dhaneswar Bhoi, presently an honorary fellow at the University of Edinburgh. He has recently completed his postdoctorate at the Center for South Asian Studies within the Department of Sociology. His postdoctoral research focused on higher educational experience and aspiration of select marginal community students in India and the UK. The research was carried out under the excellent supervision and mentorship of Dr. Hugo at the University of Edinburgh, UK. Currently, he holds the position of lecturer, specializing in sociology, psychology, and research methods within the Department of Public Health, Social Care, and Social Sciences at the London School of Science and Technology, UK. Our next panelist is Aritra Mukherjee, a research scholar at University of Delhi, studying collective resilience and collective victimhood among various victimized groups in India and post-colonial legacies. Furthermore, he mostly focuses on using creative qualitative methods to tap into the voices of resistance and resilience. Previously, he has also taught as a guest faculty at one of the colleges at University of Delhi. To those of you who are already audiences at Gulplok already would know me, my name is Antara Chakrabarty and I am a research scholar in sociology at South Asian University, New Delhi, and I work on the issues of identity, folklore, and performance. With that, we will begin our discussion of the book in the light of contemporary issues. South Asian Academia have now produced a repository of texts on caste and caste discrimination in the various lights possible. Be it the separation of vegetarian from non-vegetarian form of food delivery vendors or denying of basic rights to the Dalit children for midday meals benefits, caste is embodied on each of our sensory actions. And owing to this, what this book presents to us is in a nuanced form of understanding that there needs to be much more research on the changing nature of caste in contemporary India, in particular, work that moves away from understanding caste as a timeless structure. to offer clearer insights into the experiences and performances of caste. The books make sure that it presents to us a well timed narrative on the celebrated works on caste, be it Homo hierarchicus or on Risley's inclusion of caste and race dynamics of Indian census, or what Bourdieu would call dispositions through habitus. Although many look at the institution of caste, and it has been looked at as stagnant quite often by many, however, the ways of seeing and performing caste have variedly changed over time, which also seeks for newer epistemologies towards understanding the phenomena of caste from the perspective of both the prescribed higher and the lower caste groups. The book not only touches upon the quintessential theoretical frameworks towards caste but also gives a peek into subverted knowledges on caste, hence making it a must read for all the social sciences academics as well as those who, of course, specialized on caste based studies. As our lives get visible through the performances we make, much like what Goffman would call it a dramaturgy or Butler as gendered performativity, similarly, caste too gets performed by all the caste groups who till date identify with caste as an identity marker, and anything that might not follow the dominant codes and the code of conduct of caste becomes a performance of resistance, as Sharmila Rege says in her works on Lavani and Povada dance forms of Maharashtra. With this introduction, I would like to introduce you to our first panelist, Aritra Mukherjee. Of course, one can go on and on about the book, but I would like to open the platform to Aritra and tell us about what you feel after having gone through the book and your experience after the
And
perusal of the book.
obviously, while theorizing, I am always very cognizant that it does not become the theoretical Savarna and the empirical Shudra at the offset. Uh, Obviously, I loved the book, and as a graduate student, it gives me a lot of pleasure that somebody really came out with a very psychological theorization of caste and how it works. As like Dr. Ambedkar said, that caste is lives in the mind of people, right? It's psychic in nature, but it's very much embodied, and often psychology pays very little attention. So when I read the title itself, it was a spark of joy. Every day, I'm sorry, cast in every day, right? And what it did, and especially the segmentation of chapters, it covered a lot of everyday aspect of how people negotiate caste in daily lives. How, say, a bricklayer exists within her own community. How, especially the chapters on employment, I really enjoyed because it was showing a difference between how many people think of caste in academia and reservation, but also how it plays out in real society, like where they are negotiating still with a lot of untouchability, things like separation still being practiced in many places. And this academic caste only through reservation is a very new phenomena, as even Professor Jodhka rightfully said that these kind of academic challenges came after the 90s. So, what happens when that kind of development did not, I mean, where it has been still untouched by the 90s, say, neoliberal movement and all of that. And what it presents to me is a very interesting challenge is how do oppressed caste regard movements such as colonialism or neoliberalism or capitalism, because that allows them a way of escape, versus how many people who are now referring to as the indic theories are returned back, or apologies, I mean caste apologists. And this, I mean, should we look at all of these colonial legacies and indic history legacy very differently, or how do you challenge that? For me, that's very interesting. One theory I found, not as a criticism but as a challenge also, was I love reading Bourdieu repeatedly, and it has been taken. I mean, all of the chapters had some elements of Bourdieusian thought, especially the habitus and all of that. However, and this is just as an observation, there are other thinkers also, like Foucault's governmentality could have been there. body politics could have been there, where where there is acts of discipline that's on the body, right? And even Butler's performativity. Also, one thing can Bordosian thought or a Western thought really theorize about purity and impurity? Or do we need other lenses to theorize that kind of a thing? That's up to you to decide, and that's up to the greater caste theorization, whoever the theorization takes place. One of the questions I wanted some answer was, I saw only one psychologist. G.C. Pal sir was the only psychologist, and when you write on caste as an everyday lived phenomena, I was thinking, why are there so less? Like Yashpal sir is there. There are other thinkers on caste who have theorized on caste, who have criticized, psychologically criticized karmic theories and its acceptance, problematized other things around caste or caste resistance for that matter by Bhatia. So that could be something we look at, and could be a future direction of another paper, another book chapter, if you think about it. Some things I really appreciate about the book, and I will not be taking a lot of time, is that I really appreciated that there was so much empirical evidence on each chapter and with lived narratives. Like, there might have been the strain of trying to make the book more quantitative or making the book more substantive to quantitative research. But the lived experience, I do not know whoever committed to that, but that was such a beautiful decision to do that. What I would have loved is the lived experience to have been, say, analyzed, say, phenomenologically, interpreted phenomenologically, or some other lens of grounded theory. But that's a different choice, and that is up to the author. But especially the commitment to each of the narratives having what Geets would say depth. I mean, thick, thick description that was present in all of the chapters, which was beautiful to see. And what it allowed us was also to question how the authors were questioning the participants. That led me to I want to see the question. What kind of schedule they followed, what kind of, again, very methodological kind of observations, but that's about it. And also both migration as a way of resistance and city as a way of resistance. And again, how that is often not the case, right? But at times it comes off as the city and migration being way of moving out. And again, does it vindicate capitalism? Does it allow for more capitalist redemption vis-a-vis caste? Because I was reading one thinker, and I'm forgetting his name, about Dalit capitalism as a good thing. And we must look at Dalit entrepreneurs and all of that. And there are critiques as well, that many people say we must look at a socialist angle to it, and how welfare policies have impacted. But should we look at new data, post-liberalism, and how that has impacted vis-a-vis how the last 30 years or pre-independence era has impacted? Because I'm a socialist, but one cannot ignore the evidence of what has happened post 2000s. And will the new era of entrepreneurs, should we even critique that era as well? That who are the entrepreneurs, and can we see Dalit entrepreneurs emerging as a result? Secondly, another one point I would add is, while there is resistance, I would have loved to see more resistance and resilience. And that is up to of course, up to the editors, but there's always the problem, right? Like, do you want to shy away from, like, if you celebrate too much resistance, are you saying there's no violence at all? Which is absolutely untrue. And if you celebrate violence too much, then you say, well, they are victimized. Now, what many of the chapters, especially the big brick clean chapter by, and especially the employment chapter by this slum Valmiki shawl chapter, what they did beautifully was highlight the negotiations, and highlight the negotiations between resistance and victimization, and how and especially that chapter on how they take on the stereotypes as a way of resistance. like taking on the stereotype of being violent as a way of claiming the space. So, and this is obviously reading what Scott would say underlying resistance, which cannot be read, and there is the overt acquiescence, that kind of a thing. So yeah, those are my few comments. If you would like to grace it, there are other points, but I would give you the space. Thank you. It was such an easy read. I was able to read each chapter one day at a time, and I did not feel any pressure. The language, whoever committed to making the language so accessible, thank you, both of you, thank you. It was just so easy to read. I hope you make it available cheaply. I do not know how you would do that, and that is part of the negotiation with which is a horrible negotiation. But that is a commitment to your editorship, and I sent it to one of the books. I mean, we are writing, and I was like, look, this is the kind of language I would love.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for that kind of writing. That's a good commitment to basic writing strategy, and I think somebody must have read Elements of Style very well. I do not know, but yeah, great.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much, Aritra, for adding this as well. So, I'm sure we all have a lot to contribute, but since we have our editors with us, first we would like to listen from you about your experience on how did you come up with this book? How was the whole experience of, editing this whole many chapters, and each of the chapters give us a different narrative of caste, and what do you see? And also, like, in light of what Aritra has spoken, and then we'll get back with our thing. So we'll start with Hugo.
Thank you so much, Antara, for organizing this, for the kind introduction to us, but also to the book. And thanks so much, Aritra, for engaging in such depth with the book and for those thoughts and questions. So I'm not quite sure how to approach this, but maybe if I start by addressing some of the comments that you raised, and then if you have other questions, then we can deal with them. So the first question, how did we come to this? So Dhaneswar came here to do a postdoctoral fellowship. His work focuses on education. My work focuses on social movements, resistance, and politics. So in that sense, we do different things, but the issue that united both of our work, that came up time and again in conversations, was that actually so much of what we're talking about is at the level of the day-to-day, is at the level of interactions, relationships, experiences that occur and are often excluded from analyses. And so we thought, actually, this is an area which is understudied. You have some high-profile books like Guru and Sarukkai. That's at the level of theory, so they populate it with examples, but we thought actually there's scope here to flesh that out, to illustrate the processes by which caste is lived, because we talk about caste as a system, we talk about caste as a structure, but that structure and that system needs to be animated for it to have life in day-to-day reality. And what the chapters in our volume sought to do was to bring those day-to-day interactions to life. And I'm really pleased, Aritra, that you made that last comment, because we were seeking to have it accessible, to bring out the day-to-dayness of things. So, in a nutshell, that's how we came to it and what we tried to do. You can always have different voices, different people. We put out a call for papers. These were those who responded and, lasted the course, presented at the workshop, were able to produce papers. And amongst them, there was some selection. I totally agree with you about Bourdieu. I mean, I myself has written on a comparison on the embodiment of caste, where I've lent more heavily on Foucault than Bourdieu, but we tried not to be too directive as editors, because actually a lot of this, as you say, was about life narratives. It was about people's own experiences. And at that point, it felt wrong to impose our theoretical visions onto their day-to-day realities. And so we sought to couch the book in terms of the opening introduction, but then let people develop their own understandings. I think what we lost with that, and what Foucault lends so well to academia, is an understanding of the sanctioning mechanisms, which I think are vital to the production and reproduction of caste. That's something that I've written about elsewhere. In terms of the psychology, yes, I mean, we gain a huge amount by having Professor Powell's contribution to the volume. Many others could have contributed as well. But I think that you also pointed to the fact that several of the other contributions, Sukumar's in particular, have a psychological element, where people are understanding their everyday experiences, and they're not using the language of psychology, but either deeply emotive, deeply felt, deeply experienced day-to-day occurrences, in which they are put in boxes, in which case they are pigeonholed, they are labeled as certain things and have to come to terms with that. And you're right, the section on migration and the city on work, we felt was really important because there is this whole narrative about Dalit capitalism. So people like Chandraban Prasad talk about the liberatory effects of capitalism, and we wanted to question that because we work within a field of power. We are trapped within it. So yes, there are benefits to Dalits from colonialism, from capitalism, from neoliberalism, insofar as those processes destabilize established structures and orders. But nowhere is it the intent of those processes to liberate Dalits. And actually, the liberation, insofar as they gain it through these processes, is very limited. So, okay, you're free from debt bondage to work as a wage slave, for poor wages, poor conditions, no holiday pay. That's not liberation. If you swap debt bondage for day-to-day impoverishment, it's liberation of one form, it's entrapment of another. So we would question, the uncritical celebration of capitalism as a route out of caste. In terms of Dalit entrepreneurs, we celebrate them, but that is success for an individual. Just as Barack Obama becoming the president of America does not mean we have equality in America, a few Dalit crore-patis does not mean liberation and equality for the vast majority of Dalits across the subcontinent. So yeah, great. It's fantastic that they have the opportunity. We celebrate the fact that they've made the most of it, but actually we mustn't lose sight of the bigger picture. You'd have liked to see more resistance. Yes, and we struggled with that because of the focus on the everyday. Actually, all too often, when you're talking about resistance, you're talking about the big set pieces and the big events. And actually, I thought that many of these chapters, and you pointed this out, do speak about the day-to-day negotiations through which caste is resisted. And I thought Disha's chapter on cross-caste marriages was particularly insightful here, because this is about activists who are saying, we reject caste, we're going to marry across caste, but then they're confronted by, well, what do we do now? And the point of that paper is that actually it's not enough to make a one-time decision. This is a lifelong project. And the most successful unions were those where they didn't try and hide caste, they didn't try and shut up about things, but they made that part and parcel of their day-to-day project. And so it is resistance, but it's resistance in a different register, a sort of day-to-day, everyday resistance that you referenced from James Scott. Lots more to talk about. I'll maybe leave it there, let Dhaneswar come in, and then we can have another round of questions. But thank you so much for your engagement with the book.
Yeah, thank you very much, Antara and Aritra and Hugo. It was much engaging discussion. So Aritra rightly discussed deeply and very engaging accounts of his reading about our volume. So taking the question from how we decided to work on, as Hugo said, he works on violence and political domain or social movements, and my work is based on education and experiences. I was following Guru since my PhD days, and his the recent book, not recent now, so that everyday social. So taking the influence from everyday social. So I also joined University of Edinburgh during COVID. So it was completely lockdown, and we used to meet at coffee shop and somewhere in Meadow or some places. But when we thought about this book, so how we can collaborate a project which can capture all the experiences and self narrations, or how caste is transit from one place to other. So when we organize the thoughts, so we never thought to build a theory because we already worked on the theory of Guru and Sarukkai, everyday social, linking their theory to the lived experiences. We just landed that how we can organize a discourse on everyday aspect, that is not only capture the Dalit experiences, but also how caste is not. But when we discuss about caste study, everybody's perception is it is always related to Dalit. But in caste relation, both Dalit and non-Dalits, both upper and lower caste, are engaged the debate. So we come up the idea not only Dalits are the sufferer, but also in a dominant side how they retain caste, how they project caste, how they perform the caste and impose some community to obey the caste norm and rules. So obviously, when we sent our proposal, we got some comments from the reviewer, and that important review is coming that how caste is performative. So on that basis, in broad sense, caste in everyday life, we just theorize in terms of experience and affect. Not only the Pulse paper, who argued about how caste operates in the everyday space, where the everyday indignity, where the Dalit lost their dignity, and everyday slurs is making the caste, and how these everyday slurs and everyday indignity fits into the caste aggression, and later on how it became a major problem. David Edmond calls it caste war, and if you see, there are many incidents. And recently, we were also working on the Lathur project, where more than 40 Dalit houses were burned by the upper caste with a small incidents. So if you take the incidents of everyday indignity, everyday slur, how it happened when the Dalit war was branded as a theft. So that incident took a violent, and later on who were the sufferers. If you read my notes on the dedication, so how caste operates, so I just narrated my experiences when we were a child. So there was incidents where commonality, the eating of commonplace was not allowed to us. So we resist, but ultimately, many Dalits, including us, they're deprived of getting food that day. But one suggestion from my mother, if you equate this social system and try to give justice to some those who are deprived, you need to level up through education. So education is the only way which can emancipate. If you talks about as Hugo said, how Dalit can liberate, as for your comments on Dalit entrepreneurship. But this is just the narration of few, and a Tiki is working in the Dalit entrepreneurship organization who is working for the Dalits. So in that sense, there is one opportunity, but that is also not open up. Even government also initiate free entrepreneurship project where Dalit can get loan and prove themselves to be empowered. But that's just limited to all, not all, limited to few. In this debate, I don't want to take much effort how we landed into experience and affect. When we capture the experiences, it captures the experiences Brahmin, where they brand the food on the name of Brahmin touch. They brand the language on the name of don't talk like others. Like there is a standard language, deviating from that language and now will be treated as others. So here the question of identity. So in this sense, how the caste is injected into the society, there are some scholars like Andhra and Dipankar Gupta, they argued caste is a thing of past. So it is no more evident in the university spaces or educational spaces. But challenging that theory, so if you read my article in how the caste leads to self-harm or suicidal tendency among Dalits, if you take the question of Rohit Bemula, myself, and few others were engaged in that protest that was started in Tees, and from Tees to the ministry at Delhi. So that was a long journey, but ultimately the things what happened, Rohit did not get justice. And there are countless stories which highlights that how caste is a project where it is systematically injected to psychologically harm the Dalits. The main intention is not give them a space to equate with others or to occupy a space which is declared as, which is emphasized as some places for the upper caste. If you see the place of education is always to the Brahmins and the upper caste who wants to monopolize of that through the text they monopolized, and all the Ambedkar make it open for all through the help of British policy and all. And if you see the works of Nilima, where she argues escaping caste humiliation and caste discrimination, the list wants to visit urban periphery and settle their life there. But what happened? Ambedkar also argued that if you want to get rid of caste, we should leave the village and settle in the urban spaces. But with the hope of if you are in a caste-centric village, there is a more sense of having caste violence, caste discrimination, and humiliation. But when they reach in the urban periphery, with the hope of complete new aspiration that in urban space or urban periphery, there will be no caste and they can live a decent life, caste-free life. But ultimately, what happened? There is a giant caste which is waiting to treat them a different way. But if you see the works of John Dewey and all, experience should help further to excel your life. But for Dalit, if you follow that Guru and Sarukkai's work, how there is very less space to uh, challenge the caste system to get rid of that problem. So in that sense, caste is produced and reproduced in everyday basis, and it affects all of the life. One way, those who are privileged, they're reproducing it to get the superiority and branding their superiority to others. And in other way, the Dalits who are sufferer in this process, they're victim of this because of their political economy, because of their less power to challenge the systems. Those who challenge, ultimately, they are the victims, and they are facing more violence rather a liberatory space.
Can Western theory help? And I think what Dhaneswar has been foregrounding is the fact that we tried to draw on Guru and Sarukkai in particular, but also others. But what I would say is, can Western theory help? Well, not necessarily, and certainly not automatically. But equally, the test of theory is not who's written it, it's does it help us to understand social processes? To which I would add, is it comprehensible in its own right? So theory which is incomprehensible, which you need to read 100 times to gather something from, I find not particularly illuminating. So alongside Guru and Sarukkai, we drew on others who we felt were helpful. So many people find Bourdieu helpful. I mean, Foucault is helpful. To that, I would add one further person. So at various points in the book, we talk about banal forms of caste. So Michael Billig's work on banal nationalism, I think, is very insightful, because he writes that point when we talked about the end of history, suddenly nationalism was emerging everywhere. And he says, how do we understand this? Well, we understand this if we look at the day-to-day routinized processes through which nationalism is reproduced. By same measure, if we understand the ways in which caste occurs at the day-to-day basis, if we look at the wristbands, if we look at colors around lampposts, if we look at associations, if we look at matrimonial advertisements, these can pass, if we look at signboards, talking about Brahmin foods or Brahmin messes, these can often pass unnoticed because they're so embedded in the everyday. But it's those day-to-day processes that help us to understand the moments when caste identities erupt into more naked conflict. So yeah, I think Western theory can help, but you take theory that helps, regardless of where it comes from. And as an illustration of that, there's a huge movement in the UK at the moment to decolonize the curriculum, and I think it's vitally important. At the same time, many of my Dalit scholars come to me and say, well, we need to de-Brahmanize the curriculum as well, and the two need to go in tandem.
Yeah.
So, I was going to add to that decolonization in India is a very different process. Like it's re-Brahminization. So oftentimes, I will get a lot of heat from my colleagues for that, but it's essentially that, right? We are referring to Vedas, the Upanishads, and all of that, especially in psychology. And I see a lot of caste apologists in psychology. And that's the problem in psychology, especially. Sociology and political science, less so, because they are more reflexive of their own shortcomings. But this decolonial movement has actually emerged as a re-Brahminization movement, especially in psychology. And so for me, the problem with, introducing Indic philosophy such as karmic theory or the integrative self theory is that it validates caste, right? It validates why somebody is born and why somebody should accept. Furthermore, I have come to the realization that caste is continuously living, like if you are from the lower caste, it's continuously living a gaslighted lives, right? Like where you are continuously being told that, no, we are not doing the violence. We do not intend to do the violence. We are not violent. The violence is just happening. You are imagining the violence. So that is obviously, as Dhaneswar Bhoi's chapter indicates, there is a better living experience. That there are psychological impacts of such a life where you're continuously being gaslighted through eating habits, through pride, where one gets to take pride in Brahmin foods, Brahmin accents, but not in Dalit food, Dalit accents. And it is widely covered in psychological literature how one wants to feel good about their own social identity, right? One wants to take pride. And caste, essentially, it does not allow you the luxury of mobility from one caste to the other, which Tajfel and Turner would say creative mobility or move to other places. that is not allowed in caste. Everybody traces back to your lineage and all of that, especially even in marriage. What I loved reading about the marriage chapter was, even though you try to escape caste, patriarchy would catch up to you. So it's
Yeah.
very difficult. Like there is Brahminical violence, there is patriarchal violence. Obviously, there is neo-colonial Brahminical patriarchal violence, and words such as that I do not know how you translate to local language, but that kind of theorization would obviously be very exciting for me to see. Yeah, and that's one point I wanted to add. One research I had done was how psychology covers caste. Are therapists equipped to address caste? And shockingly, I had found that only caste is mentioned 9 times in all of Central University syllabi. So psychologists are not equipped to address caste. So what would they theorize about caste? And possibly I think it's a who are designing the syllabus, right? It's the Brahmins who are sitting in the panels and telling this is an important phenomena that is not. So you would have race come out 30, 40 times, and race is mostly American, not probably even racism exists in India, but caste is a more immediate phenomena. Secondly, I also checked who are the theorists that are being included, and we do not find Ambedkar being mentioned anywhere other than two syllabus. That's Christ University and another, and that's also because there were caste scholars there who were devising the syllabus. So that's a politics of its own, right? Brahmins and education might be emancipatory, but education for Dalits, when they visit it, as Dr. Dhaneswar's chapter indicates, it's a very gaslighting experience.
Yeah.
Because
To slightly push back on that, I mean, so one of the few psychologists who has done a lot of amazing work on caste is Sushrat Jadhav. And he gave
yeah,
a great talk here where he spoke about how caste can be negative for everybody. And actually, the Don't Talk Like the Others Do chapter shows how caste traps the dominant caste into policing
yeah,
themselves, into self-disciplining. So it's, although it does entrench privilege and inferiority, even the privileged are trapped. No, I mean, just to add to that, I mean, Shailaja Menon's paper touches on that question of, what counts as labor, which acts do we value? So some people can put in a huge amount of work. We don't value it in the same way as we value other people's labor. So I mean, that again needs to be put into the mix. And you're right, you need a whole reset of society to think about what should we, how do we view the things that people do.
And I will just comment one thing, like even if we have the representative Dalits in universities and many other places, still the caste is not in its form of changing in a positive way. Like,
Thank you so much for all the points that our panelists have given. But I have a few points to raise, and then any of you who would like to answer can take up. Since my training is in sociology, and I come from a sociological reading of caste over these years, and I also work on sensory ethnography and so on. What I like about the book is that the book presents a lot of these nuanced, everyday sensory experiences to how we can experience caste. For example, if I take my example of coming from a higher caste, there is a particular type of socialization that we get as a higher caste. For example, you are always told that you're a good Brahmin, you do not discriminate, you do not do any sort of discrimination or anything negative towards the other caste. So there is always this image of a benevolent Brahmin that is put inside your head, and vice versa, if so on. But there is always this negotiation of proving yourself to be, putting yourself out there and telling that, no, we do understand the issues, we do understand the standpoint you come from. So raising this issue, I want to put this question in front of our panelists today. This question has been looked at for several years until now by Reggae or Guru, etc. That is about that who can take the privilege of talking about caste? Like, do we still believe in that standpoint idea that only the lived experience, only the people who are experiencing this can talk about it, or have we moved on ahead with this debate? What do you see as, I mean, this transition in the last 2 decades of theoretical underpinnings? Have we moved ahead on the standpoint idea, or are we still sticking to that? So that is one question I would like to raise. Any of you can take it up.
By all means, I mean, it's a great question to put to me because I'm writing about caste and I have no caste. So where do I come from? What gives me the right to talk about it? And I think what I would say is that everybody can write and research and talk about caste, but everybody should be reflexive about where they're coming from and what impact that has. So I have no basis on which to talk about caste unless I do research, unless I immerse myself in a place and talk to people and learn from them. Without doing that, I'm writing theory, I'm writing fiction, so, but I think that lesson applies equally to everybody else. And so, one of the biggest jobs I have as a sociology lecturer is getting my students to think through what impact does your positionality have on research. So, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter where you come from, who you are matters. It shapes the interactions you have with others. It shapes the questions you ask. It shapes the access you have. And just being upfront about that is vitally important because it helps the reader to then locate where you're coming from, helps them to understand the interpretations you're making. And so I think where I think sociology is at the moment is with an accent on reflexivity, and just being, so the idea of objectivity is and always was a myth. And so acknowledging that frees us up to say, right, I'm doing this work, but this is the position from which I'm doing it. And that helps you as a reader to understand where I'm coming
from.
Yeah. Antara, thank you very much. This is such an interesting question. So this is always debate who will be in this authority position, like taking. When there will be two different perspectives. One will be like theoretical, another will be practical. When Dalit narrates their story in terms of academics, it's always covering the practical aspect, the lived experience. And when the other caste they narrate the story or engaging in the study, they have two dimensions. One, they're reading, understanding, and looking into the subject, how they study the caste. Here in UK, we have a major framework for research methodology, that is positionality. So before going to the field and in the board meeting, you have to clear about your positionality and what is your reflexivity, so how you want to do the study. So keeping your bias side, this is both for both, not both for Dalit, non-Dalit, or maybe those foreigner who want to study in India. So they are already neutral. And if they are very clear about their positionality, so it is always give a ultimate result how we can study caste. So why we're studying in Indian context, whatever my reading, I know if there is some problem, some research problem, so we are going to study. So even if all the Indian context or South Asian context or developing countries have a large area of field where the study can be held. So that's why it's called research problem. So when someone is entering into the field with the notion of unbiasedness, a proper reflexivity, and clear about the positionality without any bias, so that is a good strategy to do the study. So there is some challenges. What I'm trying to say, if as a Dalit, I'll say some word related to caste and caste atrocity related things. Maybe other Dalit not feel offended. And same question when the Brahmin and other scholar ask, they maybe feel offended. So similar to Dalit, when Dalit use that word very pridely for their self, it is a pride for themselves. But when the other use that word to make inferiority complex, then it is offense. So and that depends on the mentality or the statement of mind and the attitude of the people, those who are engaged in the research and the moral ethical grounds. So they should be fair and neutral.
Dr. Dhaneshwar's note that when Dalits do research on uh, caste, they become caste scholars, right? Like I recently researched on Dalit resistance and Dalit victimization, and similarly, then I researched on Kashmiri Pandit resistance, I mean resilience and victimization. And I did not get branded as a caste scholar, but essentially I was doing caste work. Like they when they regard education as a Brahmin tool for emancipation and to fight their victimization of displacement, it's caste in its action, in its basic action. But that label does not come to me. Whereas one of my friends who did caste and another chapter on well-being, he became for the major part Dalit arguing on caste, so he's a caste scholar. And he was told, please do not do this because you would get typecasted. So it's less to do. I mean, there is obviously the ethics of who can do it, but also ethics of how are you viewed post that work. So I can still retain to be the social psychologist, whereas he has to retain being a caste scholar, and that is I find very problematic in who gets to do what, and that especially is what Dr. Goring has also said, that we must be very we must realize how we are complicit in producing the violence or the power dynamics. So while I can transgress between studying Dalit resistance and Kashmiri Pandit resilience, I do not know if that same with power is accorded to my Dalit friend who is researching on some form of resistance. Would he be able to do the same study? And what would his hurdle be? And what access I gain should be a focus of study, I believe. Thank you.
No, I totally agree. And I think one of the risks of the standpoint perspective is that you ghettoize minorities into only being able to study minorities. So we have no Dalits in the department, but we're going to launch a Centre for Dalit Studies, so we'll appoint a Dalit to do that. Well, no, our main professors should be open to people of all castes. And this job too, you shouldn't isolate people into silos. The work that has been done on refugees in Europe has raised similar issues. You know, who can speak, who can do the research, and I think the consensus there, which applies equally in the caste context, is making sure as a researcher, firstly, that your claims are based on evidence, not
Yeah,
common sense or stereotype,
yeah,
and secondly, that you are speaking with and not for categories of people. So if you set yourself up as the expert, automatically you should be subject to scrutiny and critique. But you know, if you're willing to learn from the people you're studying, then you're much more likely to gain their trust and thereby gain a better insight into what, you know, into their realities.
Um, yes, so thank you so much for answering this and having a quick discussion over it. The last thing that I would like to put forth is what Hugo mentioned, and there is a whole thematic chapter on it about being the banal everyday casteism. This is a field which I feel currently in sociology or science student or any field has become quite provocative to work on, because There were times where we just ignored the everyday ordinary banal experiences in our day-to-day lives, and how these little minute details also point out, like for example, there are so many phrases or things that we say in our vernacular languages which might have a background to a particular caste or so on. A lot of slurs and slangs, I think one of you already spoke on this, are coming from different caste angles and so on, and which is again a two-way negotiated process. It can be towards any path. So I think what this book serves as a purpose to me right now, with already Aritra mentioned in the beginning, the lucidity of the language, and how uh, how empirically the book has been presented over these chapters. I mean, we obviously have read Guru and Sarukkai's Everyday Social and gotten a theoretical background, but this book is very accessible in terms of social science students who are maybe just starting with reading about caste and so on. So this is my last question to all three of you, and including our panelist Aritra, that what would you like to have as a message towards students or anybody who would like to have a read on caste or would like to work on caste, or what do you see as a scope of work that can more scope of work that can come up in future, covering some more caveats that probably we have not covered until now but can be covered in future. So would like to know from three of you.
I can go first again. I mean, I just think what would I like to see covered? I'm more empirical work on everything. I am by nature an empiricist. Insofar as I engage with theory, it is to try and understand the things that I've uncovered. And I mean, caste is constantly evolving, and so I think one of the key take-home messages of the book is not to assume that we understand caste, because the moment you think you've got it covered, it's changed, and some other developments have taken place, different dynamics emerge. And so we constantly need to seek to understand the new forms that it takes. There's a whole development in the UK and US where caste, legislation against casteism is being debated, in some cases passed, because actually caste has taken different forms in these contexts and needs to be addressed as such. So more work on the forms that caste is taking in different contexts will help us to understand, address, and at some point in the future, annihilate it.
We argued in our introduction, starting from birth to death, caste is operative, it's functional. So we need caste in all perspective, from superior, inferior, in our birth time. We grow through caste, we die through caste, even if the segregation of cremation grounds is based on performance caste. Like there are villages where the Dalits were cremated in a separate space and Brahmins were cremated in another place. The space for the Brahmin is wide, and place for the Dalit cremation ground is very less. So everything is restricted. So we think the caste is thing of past, but it is not real. There are evidences which come closer through the experiences, through the lived experiences, but it's operative in a memory lens, mental lens, and it acted through different violence, different discrimination, humiliation, and in its negative way, it kills the life of the people, especially the marginal sections or the elites who are trapped into it. And it lives in every space. Talking about the sensory experiences, it can feel, refeel, and also remembered through touch, through listen, through like every sensory organs, through even so. There are some Dalit community, they are banned on the term of unseeability. Like if someone see that Dalit, they'll be branded as like impure.
Quickly, what I would love to see, and continuing from Dr. Gorringe's point and Dr. Dhaneswar Bhoi's point, is I would want to the upper caste problematization of their own position, and that is always very necessary, especially in how we are representing, what kind of movies we are making, who is getting, like you see serials such as Kota Factory and all of this, but who is the
Yeah.
protagonist? It's always the upper caste protagonist.
Yeah.
You see C aspirant, it's the upper caste protagonist, as if like the Dalit has the seat completely without trying or anything. So these upper castes need to problematize their own position and how they view themselves. Competition exists for everybody. It's not like the one person does not compete. Second, my aspiration would be to see more resilience, resistance narratives, of from all sides. Like it's regardless, and how it is being challenged. Like each of the chapters had some bit of resistance and resilience. It was not like complete violence, complete acceptance of oppression. They were negotiating. It was, and one thing we really need to highlight is the position of bounded negotiation, bounded agency, like how in limited amount of agency, how do people exact their own position, and that we need to cognize as them trying to make the best out of their lives. We cannot see direct oppression, direct resilience, direct resistance, and all of that. And I would love to see more literature on that, more creative methods being embraced. Like this huge amount of literature on Dalit autobiography, Dalit poetry, which I mean had not received the stature of being proper literature and proper poetry or whatever. But we need to embrace those methods to highlight how they have historically resisted. Not only do we need to bring forth, as Dr. Bhoi pointed out, the amount of hateful oppression that there is, oppression of disgust, but also the possibility of new realities that is also possible. So those are through, I mean, sorry, hopeful resistance that comes in the point of literature, prose, their own narratives, their own songs. I think we, as thinkers, as methodologists, we must think of capturing, as both of them mentioned, epistemology of senses, and how do we celebrate them, how do we capture them. That's about it from my side.
With this, I would like to thank all our panelists, our editors of the book who has joined us today and has given us such insightful uh, peek of the book. And I think this book is a kind of a need of the hour on what provocations and what more provocations we can have on reading caste or experiencing caste, or as Aritra said, on more about resistance and resilience. So, with that, I would like to thank all the audiences who have joined us today on this episode, and I will meet you on the next episode.